Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, developer advocate for Dremio. I'm just trying to get in the habit of doing more regular Twitter spaces, just on interesting topics that relate to important things. And this is a topic that I feel like can never be discussed enough because it's a really key and important decision that many companies will have to make over the next several years. And it's a decision that I think a lot of people, one, they're still not quite familiar with what is a table format and like how integral a decision it is, especially in this like sort of new era of data engineering. So first, I kind of like explain what is this new era that I'm talking about. This is the era of the data lakehouse. Essentially, you're seeing this sort of massive trend, um, basically trying to combine data lakes and data warehouses, and just kind of explain like the previous paradigm before you had just your standard data lake, which was generally mainly a dumping place for data. So you had all your structured and unstructured data there because it was an affordable place to put your data. Okay, because it was not affordable to store all your data in a data warehouse because data warehouses are expensive and generally don't house unstructured data. So you'd have all your data in this data lake, and then you would take a little bit of that data, the data you really, 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 really want to analyze, and move it over to a data warehouse. And a data warehouse, has all like the nice bells and whistles and optimizations, so that way you can do really, easy and fast analytics, but with a really, really hefty price tag. So people would like kind of like the best of both worlds. They would like the data lake's affordability, and they like the fact that when you have your data in your data lake, any tool can access it. It's not like locked away from different tools. It's not kind of in a box. It's in your storage. It's under your control. There's one copy, and again, you're not bleeding cash to have your data lake. People like the ease of use and the performance of using a data warehouse, but they don't like the cost. They don't like that their data is locked into this box where if other tools want to access it, they can't unless they get special permission. And basically, you have, and then basically later on, if you want to migrate your data, it's a mess. Like people want to kind of avoid that. So basically, you have this sort of paradigm where people want to do more analytics on their data lake, but they want it to be more like a data warehouse. And sort of this paradigm is referred to as the data lakehouse. The idea is having the best of all worlds, being able to have your data stored in accessibly open on your data lake, but being able to have tools that give you the experience of using a data warehouse where it's easy to use, where it is open. And I'm gonna really focus on that word open because that's a really, really, really key point that I don't think people are appreciating enough. And basically be able to do it performantly. Okay. But sort of like the first piece, like essentially what's going to happen is that really, really they kind of get that performance, they get that ease of use to really like allow all these variety of tools to be able to plug into your data set. You need a couple different pillars. One pillar is kind of already clear, like what is sort of like the file format, how we're going to store our data, and that's like Parquet. Okay, some data is stored as ORC, some data set is stored as Avro, but it's very clear that Parquet is sort of like the overall sort of market winner as far as how we're going to store our data. Now, the thing is that your data set isn't just going to be like one Parquet file. It might be 1,000. It might be 10,000 Parquet files sitting on your object storage on your data lake. The question then becomes, how does a query engine, okay, the Dremios, the Sparks, how do they know when they run a query that these 10,000 Parquet files are one data set? Okay, and that's the job of the table format. The table format is sort of like this abstraction, this basically taking several files and giving them a nice little wrapper so that way they're treated as one thing, one table. Okay, and not only are we able to recognize which files make up that table, there's a bunch of metadata built around that table that gives information that engines can use to make queries on that data set more performant. Okay, so that is essentially what table formats do and what table formats are. And so basically, really, to kind of make sure that you have that ease of use and that performance, everyone who's kind of building their data lake house, and again, a data lake house isn't a particular vendor. Like there's no thing that you just say, hey, I want to buy this thing and I have a data lake house. It's sort of a combination of how you use several things. Okay, so again, storing data either on like object storage or on HDFS using file format like Parquet, and then organizing all those Parquet files as tables using a table format. Okay, and there's three major table formats that are kind of vying in the market right now. If you want to kind of hear what I have to say about them, what I highly recommend doing is heading over to dremio.com/subsurface and reading the articles I have comparing the three main formats. There's currently three articles on the topic, basically a general sort of feature by feature comparison, two, a comparison of sort of like their communities and governance, and three, a comparison of their partitioning features. And yeah, so you can check all those articles and a bunch of other articles over there. That's dremio.com/subsurface. But a couple things when it comes to like thinking about like, okay, hey, which table format should I choose? There's generally going to be a couple of different paradigms that people are going to think of. Like one, the feature set. Okay. Now, features, but really is features, performance, and openness. And openness is going to be the one I think is sort of the most important differentiator because it's the one thing, like when it comes to features over time, you're going to end up generally with feature parity because if one project has like a really cool feature, other projects going to be like, oh, okay, let's try that. Let's try to build a version of that. So you eventually over time will end up having most, if not all, features in all formats. Then there's performance, and the thing about performance is that like it's not really like the performance. The performance of a particular table format can be differ by engine. So you can have like 5 different engines that can read a particular table format, and they're going to have completely different performance. Okay, so oftentimes you see all these like performance benchmarks, and almost all the times it's Spark. Okay, and Spark is definitely a fairly industry standard tool. But at the end of the day, there's going to be other tools you're going to use. They're going to have all sorts of great features. They can enhance performance, or other tools that may not have as good performance using certain table formats. So using performance can sometimes be a weird benchmark because it depends on what tools you use. So how a particular table format performs in Spark doesn't necessarily matter if you're not using Spark and you're using a different tool. Okay, so performance can be kind of, and features, again, you'll eventually lead to feature parity. Performance, again, it depends on the particular tools and also the particular table settings. Okay, you can actually take any of these table formats, um, and on the same engine, you'll get completely different performance on the same engine with the same data set, with slightly different table settings, with slightly different engine settings. So it's especially so. Point is like it's really hard to get like a good solid approximation of necessarily what your use case would look like until you apply it to your actual use case. And again, every engine's going to like constantly be working on improving their performance, and every table format is going to constantly be improving on the things that lead to better performance. So those basically snapshots of a format's features, of a format's performance is oftentimes a snapshot in a moment in time. But the one thing that generally is kind of doesn't change too often is like the culture, and the culture being sort of like I would say like an open-ish culture versus a closed-ish culture. Because again, there are a variety of shades of gray when it comes to openness. And generally, if you have a closed, and basically when I say like openness, I mean the ability not just to be able to see the code of a project. Like open source, being able to see your code is very good because then I can like see what the project is and then inviting people to come contribute to that code. That's great, but also comes down to the openness in governance, like being who's in of the body that's kind of oversees the project. How many different interested parties are interested in that body? Okay, when it comes to a lot of the sort of important decision making over how the project evolves, are outsiders brought in? Our outsiders are only brought in on the other side, on the idea of consumption, brought in the idea of contributing. But there's a difference between contributing and really having like a strong say, sort of on the direction, on what the priorities are, which pull requests get merged, things like this. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because generally, if you have one party that really, really kind of controls a particular project, the features basically there's a pro and con. Basically, when one party really kind of controls the project, they can move things along faster. Okay, and that can be a real benefit in the early stages of product adoption because basically you'll be able to bring out features a little bit faster. The problem comes over time. What happens is that really for large ecosystem adoption, other tools need to kind of really like feel comfortable making the investment in building on top of this project. And basically, if there's one party that really kind of controls that project, it becomes hard for those outside parties to really be like, oh, okay, well, because of the sort of these closish walls, you know, are will never be able to build on top of your project in the way that you can. So then why support that when you can support something else where basically there's a more equal playing field? So then what happens is that over time, the amount of tools and that support the thing become less. The level of support they are given becomes less. So you might have that one really great vendor, but what happens when they go away? And what happens when they're the only one? What happens to the price? What happens to the cost? Because that was one of the big reasons we wanted this data lakehouse, to make sure that we keep costs in check and avoid those costs of the data warehouse. So you so the way those costs get kept track of is not just because you're putting your data in your own storage, but because you have openness and there's going to be that equal playing field of all these tools to help, create that competitive atmosphere to keep costs in check. Okay. So this is why it's important that when you take a look at like a table format, you want one with like not just open source code and you know contributors from different places, but you also want to make sure that their governing bodies are, one, who are governing the project, and two, like that those people governing the project come from many different different have different and sometimes even conflicting interests, so that way it keeps that playing field nice and even, because that way you're going to get the robust set of competitive tools. They're going to keep, again, in the long run, keep costs down and also lead to more innovation, because again, competition also leads to innovation. So this is like a key reason why like open culture, again, it's not just open source code, but open culture across an entire component like a table format is so important, because that's going to really lead to like making sure that those benefits of the data lakehouse are maintained over the long run. That the data lakehouse doesn't just become data warehouse 2.0. So you really want to be able to like have an environment where you can use different tools with your data as needed, and you're never locked in. Okay, you want to avoid that locked in, because again, even if you create a data lakehouse, but you create your data lakehouse along the wrong table format, because it isn't like you could theoretically make tables with all three formats, but then that's not necessarily efficient, or it becomes tricky to kind of track sort of your updates. You really want to have one table format that you kind of commit to. But if you commit to the wrong table format and then you're stuck with only one tool that really does the job for that table format, years down the road, okay, well, you're locked in again. And again, you're going to have all the problems with that locked in brings, which is, one, limit of the tools that you can use and the cost, because there's such a limited amount of tools and you have that you're kind of captured. So when it comes to comparing the different table formats, openness to me is probably like the chief and most important benchmark, because that's the one thing that just won't naturally evolve over time. It's the one thing that can have cause the most damage over time. That was just my thoughts on the topic. So hopefully after listening to this, you now, one, understand what a table format is, kind of understand, like, again, the thought process of like, okay, when I'm looking at these and doing my research, thinking about features, thinking about performance, thinking about openness, how to kind of like put these into perspective, um, when making that decision, because it is really the core decision in making your data lakehouse. Basically, once you make that decision of what table format you're using, that's going to determine which tools you can use with your data. Okay, what tools in the future you can use with your data, because again, there's the aspect of openness and also the aspect of momentum, like how many people are contributing to this project currently, how many tools already support this project. Because if there's a lot of tools, if there's a lot of momentum around this project now, there'll probably be more momentum later. Okay, and all these things kind of really point to this being sort of like a good bet, because again, there is a cost of doing another migration down the road. So you want to kind of avoid that level of lock-in. But that's all I want to do today. I want to be doing more Twitter Spaces in the future on topics like this. So if you guys have enjoyed this, give me a retweet, give it a like, so that way I know you guys are enjoying this content, and I'll keep making them. But have a great day and enjoy.